Today I want to talk about back to the sales basics. And this is for people who are just getting into sales and maybe need to learn some of the terminology. It's almost like you got to learn the language to be able to communicate with other salespeople, and we got to have common language and, more importantly, common definitions. Because some people can give a phrase or a word different meanings. I'm going to try to clarify those for you, and we'll get into it. Let's go. All right, so here are the things I'm going to talk about today. Again, these are the basics I want to cover. These are all the phrases. Again, if you're in sales, you know what these are. So let's go through them one at a time. First one here is obviously, I'm putting my head right there. We're going to talk about leads, inbound and outbound, funnel, pipeline, what's the difference, MQL versus SQL, market qualified lead versus a sales qualified lead, sales process, sales cycle, conversion rate, close rates, customer lifetime value, and the value of referrals. So again, basic stuff for those who've been around, but if you're just joining sales, you have to know this stuff. So let's get into it. Now let's talk about leads real quick. When we talk about leads, there's two types of leads. Now a lead is a potential client, right? Potential buyer. And so for example, when we talk about inbound, that's typically, let's say you have a website and you have people coming to your website. That is an inbound lead. Or they found you online and they fill out a form and they send an inbound lead, right? Or they pick up the phone and call you. That's an inbound lead. Maybe they looked at the website, got your number, decided to call you. That's an inbound lead. Outbound, you often hear about cold calling. Cold calling, this is you reaching out. So in other words, when we talk about outbound, we're talking about you're calling out to the customer. When you talk about inbound, they're coming to you. Now, what's important to note here, and you'll hear people talk about, cold calling is dead. No, it's not, right? Inbound is the way to go, and it's the only thing you need to do. No, it's not. It's usually a blend of the two, right? Depending on your business and what you're selling. So I won't get into the details here, but there's an interesting fact here. When you have inbound versus outbound, two things are happening. When leads are coming in from, let's say, the internet, we'll call that the internet, right? Online, they're not qualified. Let me just say that again. They're not qualified. In other words, you don't know who's coming to your website and asking for more information or asking for a demo. On the reverse side, or the other side of the spectrum, outbound, you know exactly who you're calling. In other words, you're going to call only qualified people. So when you hear people have this grand debate about inbound versus outbound, realize that inbound, you can't really qualify who comes to your site. Outbound, you have more qualified, more control. But again, this probably has more reach. If you have great marketing, you can qualify here on the inbound. But again, that's the basic difference. That's as deep as I want to go for today. So when you hear people talk about cold calling, it's outbound. When we talk about lead generation or inbound leads, we're talking it's coming to us, right? Big difference. Now again, what do you want to do? Depends on what you're selling. If I were to kind of give you a general rule, if I can just kind of insert this, if I have a high ticket item, for example, I'm selling, $1 million system, right? That's going to be a B2B sales. I'm going to do a lot of outbound. In other words, I'm going to be calling a lot of people, right? Because if I just get one deal, that's going to be worth it. But let's say I'm selling I'll just say a $20 item. I'm not going to cold call for $20, right? So I'm going to try to get people to come to the site. So that's kind of one way of looking at the differences. All right. We kind of understand inbound versus outbound. Let's go to the next one. Let's talk about the sales funnel. You'll hear this word sales funnel, right? Let's get into it. Now, in sales funnels, language you often hear is that, this is, by the way, this right here is the proverbial TOFU. I didn't have that in the language. TOFU means top of the funnel. I know, cute, right? And down here, it's actually a BOFU, right? Bottom of the funnel. Right? Too much jargon. Let me erase that. So I want you to imagine that this funnel represents your website, right? One way of looking at it. And what you're trying to do is generate leads, as we talked about, inbound leads. These are inbound leads to your website. Now, there's several ways you can do this. One is you can use pay-per-click, or also known as search engine marketing. This is those ads you see on Facebook, Google, so forth and so on. Or maybe you advertise on television, right? Or you have a billboard, or, again, people can find you different ways. And so all these are inbound lead. And because they're inbound, what we know already is that we don't know who they are, so they're not really qualified yet. So when we get an inbound lead, when we get inbound leads, the first thing to do is you're going to have this first level, and right here we have what they call a market qualified lead. A market qualified leads means we don't know, it came from marketing, right? So marketing generated some content online. Maybe it was a blog or something. People looked at the blog, went over to the website. You read something on LinkedIn, you went to the website. You watched a video on YouTube, you then went to the website. So, but again, we don't know who's coming in. So when we get, let's say somebody fills out a form, these are market qualified leads. Now, typically somebody right here, and I'll just call this could be some type of, I'll say administrative or executive position, right? And what they'll do is they'll talk and contact that lead. So for example, let's go through it slowly. Somebody gets to your website, fills out the form, right? They fill out the form, and then you look at it. Then you as a salesperson, let's say an account executive, right? You call and you talk to that person. And again, you ask them, I got your contact information. Thank you for calling. I said, can you tell us what you're looking for? And maybe as you're having these discovery conversations, by the way, that's another phrase you'll often hear. Discovery conversation is you're trying to find out what they want and does it align with what you offer. You're trying to find out two things. One, does it align? And two, do they really understand the price range? So for example, if somebody calls in and they want to know more about pools, right? One of the things you will ask is, how much research have you done? And if they say, I've done none, and I would say something like, and again, I'm exaggerating for effect here, what's your budget? They go, $5,000. Well, the average pool is about $80,000, $100,000, $150,000. There's a mismatch here. And I would probably say that's not a good qualified lead to pass on to sales. Now, when we pass on a qualified lead, so let's say I'm marketing or I'm the account executive, I'm talking to the person who generated, sent in contact information. I'm talking to them and they're saying, Victor, I'm looking for a pool. How much research have you done? I've done a lot of research. So tell me what you're looking for. Well, I'm looking for a pool about this big, yay big, this deep, and my budget is about $100,000 to $200,000. Qualified lead. We then pass that over to sales, and we call that a sales qualified lead. In other words, it's gone through the filter, right? These are qualified leads. It is now the salesperson's job to set up a meeting, right? Either one-on-one. If it's a pool, it's going to be a walkthrough at the house, go through the sales process, get the design going, put the contract, proposal, and close it. That's kind of the idea. So phrases you should know. Leads that come at the top of the funnel, unqualified, nobody knows who they are. If it's a market qualified leads, again, they've read a lot of marketing literature or they've been conditioned by marketing. In other words, on their customer journey, they've read a lot of information. They know about your company. They kind of know what they want. Their preferences are starting to form, and then they send the form in. And then somebody at this level is going to have the initial conversation to qualify this person to see if they should move it on to the next level, which is the salesperson, so they can talk to them directly. So again, market qualified lead, sales qualified lead. We love sales qualified leads. And then again, this is called the top of the funnel, and we have different leads, inbound leads coming in. If the salesperson talks to them, the salesperson now has the initial conversation with the person, and it's looking pretty good, then that person or that client is officially in the pipeline, right? And the pipeline means these are the number of opportunities that are now qualified rather. In other words, I've qualified it as a salesperson. I want to put this in a pipeline. Keep in mind that salespeople have to report to managers. Salespeople only want to report opportunities that they themselves have qualified. So for example, if marketing, let me erase this mess here. If marketing, here's a marketing qualified lead, sales qualified lead. If marketing passed on, they got 100 leads, and out of the 100 leads, marketing says, I think 50 are good. So they pass it on to sales. Sales then talks to these 50, says, not really, it's not 50. 50 is a bit much, right? So they'll say, sorry to have my back to you on that one. So they'll say 50 is a little bit too much. And after the salesperson talks to them, I have 25 qualified leads. That is what's reported in the pipeline. Now that is my portfolio of opportunity. So that is what is considered a pipeline. So now I have 20 opportunities in the pipeline, right? So again, funnel, top of the funnel, market qualified lead, sales qualified leads. They talk to the person and say, yeah, that's a real deal right there. That is a real deal. Let's put that into the pipeline. Let's put that into the CRM. customer relationship management system where we track all our clients, right? Our potential clients. Next, let's go keep going. And again, giving you the visual so you get it all together here. So again, funnel, I'm repeating myself. This is a market qualified lead, sales qualified lead. We now have 25 good opportunities in the pipeline. Salesperson sets up the first meeting. Maybe there's a presentation demo. Maybe there has to be a second meeting. Finally, we get around to a proposal. Then we put a contract together. We try to close it. And then we install or service that client. This right here is the sales process. So when you hear people talking about what is your sales process, this is it right here. That's the sales process, okay? So again, let's kind of just back up here because there's a lot of stuff going on here. Funnel, market, sales qualified lead in the pipeline. Now we got to try to move it through the pipeline, right? And this sales process is what moves it through the pipeline. Think of pipeline as revenue plumbing, right? That's the best way of looking at it. And your goal is to close it. Now, every product or every service you sell has a different sales process depending on what you're selling. This is a very generic one, okay? So this could be, for example, a software package I'm selling, or it could even be a pool, right? The second meeting, the first meeting could be the walkthrough. The second meeting could be, let's say, the design, review the design of the pool. So again, this is sales process. So when I talk to companies and I'm trying to help them, as far as selling, one of the first things I ask is, let me see your sales process, And sometimes I ask, tell me where you're getting your leads from. Because remember that phrase, GIGO, right? Maybe I'm dating myself. Garbage in, garbage out. If we don't have good leads coming in, then garbage in, garbage out. Close rate's going to be low. So if we got qualified leads coming into the pipeline and a great sales process, we're going to convert and close at a higher rate. So again, that right there is known as a sales process. So we got some terms going on here. We got funnel. We got top of funnel. Market qualified lead, sales qualified lead. Get the opportunities into the pipeline. We now have a sales process to follow. Let's keep going. Oh, what about sales cycle? Oh, now a sales cycle this is where you're to have like different philosophies and arguments about, well, how do you measure a sales cycle? So in other words, a sales cycle is, when did it start and when did I close the deal? That's the sales cycle. Here's where people kind of get all wiggy, if you know what I mean. Everybody argues about this. Where do you measure it from? So for example, here's a market qualified lead. Here's a sales qualified lead. And then here's where the lead came in, right? Now, so when we're talking about sales cycle, you're going to hear this question all the time. Well, where do you measure it from, Victor? Do you measure it from the TOFU, the top of the funnel, all the way to the close? Usually it's at the close, right? Install, service, contract, install. Some people want to measure it here after the deal has been installed. See where people get into an argument? Sometimes after marketing has talked to them, they say, no, I want to start here. I want this to be the starting point. And then measure it all the way out to here. Or, no. Salespeople are like, no, that's not fair because we got to close the deal. We're sales. So you know what? It should only start after we've qualified the opportunity. It should start right here and go right there. So if you ever get into an argument about sales cycle, disagreement, this is it right here. This is what most people are talking about. It's just about where do you want to start. This is important. So if you were to ask me, well, Victor, where would you measure it from? I would measure it from here. After the salesperson has talked to the actual lead. That's where I would start measuring. And then I would measure it all the way through to install is done. Some people just say at the close of the deal, whatever it is. By the way, you can choose either one. Again, every company is going to define it their own way. You just have to be consistent across your organization in terms of how you measure it. So in other words, you can have some salespeople measuring from here, some managers measuring it from here, some measuring only up to here. You can't do that. So if you're going to choose a sales cycle in terms of when's, again, it's like a starting gun. Start, when does it start? And then finish line, when does it finish? So determine the start line, the starting line, and determine the finish line. That's your sales cycle. Now, why is knowing your sales cycle important? One is because the longer that sales cycle extends out, the more costly the deal gets. This is important. The longer the sales cycle, the higher, you're going to hear a phrase like, the higher the cost of sale. This is actually measured as a COS. This is important because if you're a manager, divisional vice president, CEO, people who have to manage budgets, we know that the longer it takes to close a deal, we're chewing up more time, more labor of that salesperson. And the more time you spend on one deal because it's extending itself, the less time you spend on another deal. In other words, the opportunity cost is high. So what you often hear companies talk about is what is the sales cycle? And then how do we accelerate the sales cycle? In other words, how do you shrink it, make it faster? In other words, how do you sell faster? So again, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole on this one, but there's a lot of ways you can shorten the sales cycle. Maybe you can combine 2 meetings into one, and maybe you can do the presentation, the proposal at the same time. It all depends on the company and the sales cycle. So again, when I talk to companies, I ask about their sales cycle, and then I ask them if they're happy with the length of the sales cycle. If they say no, then we start working on ways to shorten that sales cycle. For example, if you've watched my other Sales After Dark, you know that the biggest extender of a sales cycle is, let me think about it. Oh, that's a killer, right? Because if right here, you do a proposal, right? You give them the proposal, and the person says, let me think about it. And you say, okay, when can I call you back? When can I get back to you? And then they ghost you. And then they disappear for 2 weeks. And you keep calling, emailing, texting, and the sales cycle is extending. Now let's say that you finally did close a deal, right? You finally did. But now you've added, let's say, 2 weeks to that sales cycle because it took you that long. So now your sales cycle is longer, and again, because you're spending more time trying to close this deal, you spend less time elsewhere. So if again, go into the Sales Velocity Academy, I talk about handling objections like, let me think about it, let me talk to my boss, let me talk to my committee, can I get a discount? All these objections you have to know, because when you're in these conversations during the sales cycle, especially right here in the proposal phase, you have to have answers. And when someone says, let me think about it, you have to have the right answer. And if you've studied my script on let me think about it, you know that that will give you an answer right there and then. So again, that's another way of shortening the sales cycle or stopping for letting it get longer. All right, continuing on. Next. Let's talk about conversion rate, close rates, right? So if you had 20 leads, sales qualified leads, right? And you converted 2 of those leads. So I should have put SQL. See, you're getting it, right? At 20 leads, I converted 2. What's my close rate? Not trying to trick you, right? Close rate is 10%. Now, 10% close rate could be good or bad depending on what industry you're in. But I always tell people, whatever your close rate is, let's measure it, and then figure out what the industry norm is. In other words, different industries have different close rates. Question I always ask during the workshops is, what is your current close rate, and then what is the industry average? 2 numbers you always want. So again, if the industry average is 20%, guess what? We got some work to do, right? And this is what a lot of people call me in for, because there's this disparity. Their close rate is low, the industry is higher. Victor, how do we get here? I get that. Now, here's a question for you, and this is an interesting one. Let's talk about search engine marketing. Generating inbound leads, those pay-per-click ads that you click on. Let me ask you a question. If you pay $2,000 a month, advertising dollars, right? You generated 50 leads. 50 leads. 50 what? Qualified leads. And you converted 1. Was it worth it? Was it worth it? Good question. Let's talk about it, right? Let's talk about it. So the answer really, to answer that question, you have to figure out what you're selling. Let's say that you're selling a service, right? You're selling a service. And every time you close a deal, the initial deal is always about $400. $400, right? $400 right there. Now, and then you also get them to agree to a $200 monthly subscription, right? So you got $400, right? The initial investment, and then $200 a month, right? Now, the average client stays with you 2 years. Well, what is the customer lifetime value? This is so important. This is so important. Customer lifetime value. Every company measures it differently. Like, for example, I think Starbucks uses a 20-year cycle. In other words, if you start buying Starbucks, you typically hang around for 20 years. Amazing, right? Some companies, I ask them and they don't even know. So if I were to ask you on average, if somebody buys from you today, how long will they continue to buy from you before they stop buying? Right? And again, these are numbers that you have to measure. Every company differs. So if the initial deal was 400, monthly 200, stayed with me for 2 years on average, right? You just kind of come up with an average. Then over their lifetime, which is 2 years, they paid me $400, 200 times 24, that's $5,200. Now, how much did I just invest? So let's go to the numbers now. I invested $2,000 to get one client, right? 50 leads, I only got one client. If I plug in my numbers, what you're going to see is I got a 420% return on investment. So in other words, if I plug this number in here, 2,000 in here, and here, I come up with a return on investment of 420. So the answer is yes, it's worth it if you're thinking long term. Now, if the person just bought the first month, let me go back a slide. This is where people kind of get it wrong. If the person just bought $400, or let's just say even just $200 the first month, people say, well, I invested $2,000. That's not worth it. Well, if you're taking a snapshot 1 month only, you're right. But if you're thinking customer lifetime value, which is how you should think, then you see it differently. In other words, this right here determines your budget. You could make the argument. You as a marketing person or justifying marketing budgets can make the argument that this now should be what you invest to actually get a lead. So instead of spending $2,000, you can spend up to $5,200 and that would be break even. Again, you would pick a number lower than this, whatever that number you're comfortable with, but you get the idea. Understanding how long they're going to be with you, not just what they bought today, but what they're going to buy over 2 years is what's really going to matter in your case. So that is customer lifetime value. Now, again, we're closing out here. So we got funnels, we got pipeline, we got sales process, and now, where most of us miss it, referrals. Yes, those beautiful referrals. Why do referrals matter? And why don't we talk about referrals more? Think about it. You've installed their stuff. They're totally happy, right? They give you great reviews on Yelp, and wherever it may be, on Google, whatever. They give you great reviews. So if they're giving you great reviews, now's the time to go what? Ask for a referral. Now again, when someone gives you a referral, it's not a cold lead. In other words, coming in, inbound, it's a warm lead. In other words, if they send you a referral, they're probably going to let that person know that you're going to be calling them. So that's a referral. So one of the things it does is shortens the sales cycle. Why? Because they know you're a known entity. In other words, my friend Bill referred me, you to me. That means I'm going to say, well, okay, I trust him, so if then I trust you. Trust has a way of shrinking a sales cycle. So that's why referrals are powerful. Number 2, doesn't cost you any money to get a referral. Just a little time. That could be money. All it takes is, can I get a referral? Just simply asking for a referral. So there's no marketing budget here. It's you simply asking. And the majority of people don't ask for a referral. And last but not least, you get a higher close rate. Now think about this. If a referral costs you no money, it shortens your sales cycle because there's more trust, right? There's no I'll think about it. And it's a higher close rate because, again, you're a known entity because you came from my friend. Therefore, I'm more likely to trust you. So my close rate is going to be much higher than 10%, which means we should always ask for referrals. And again, most people don't. And so I think that is my last slide, and this is our list for today. I know I covered that quick, but you get the idea. Leads, inbound versus outbound, funnel and pipeline. We also talk about the TOFU and the BOFU, right? The BOFU doesn't matter really. I got to be honest. The TOFU doesn't matter either. But now that you know the language, there it is. You got market qualified lead, sales qualified lead, sales process, right? That's this. What are the steps in the sales process? And then How long is that sales cycle? What's your close rate? We're always looking to increase that. Customer lifetime value. What's a lead worth to you over time? And last but not least, get referrals because they are awesome and they don't cost that much money. And that is Sales Basics terminology.